Welcome, everyone, to the most accurate podcast. I am one of your hosts, Brandon Niles. With me are my excellent co-hosts, Jen Eakins and Chris Allen. Chris, how's it going, buddy?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited for Thursday night. We've got the draft. We've got all this content and just the waiting that we've been doing over the last few months, kind of leading up to this point. So excited to see the draft, excited to talk ball with y'all and Shane as well. So I'm excited to get into it. Jen, how you doing though?
I'm doing good. I can see your lovely face today. No hidden graphics and things like that. So that's wonderful.
Not yet, at least. Yeah.
Not yet. No, I'm doing great. I mean, as you guys know, I'm not a huge draft fan. I'm not the person that geeks out over it as much as other people do. However, I'm into it. I'm excited. And we have a special guest, Shane. So how are you, Shane?
I'm doing good. I mean, this is Christmas week for me, so I'm up at all hours and tweaking the mock draft and doing all that. So I can't wait. I'm jumping out of my skin here.
Excellent. Well, I'm psyched to have you on, Shane. One of my favorite draft analysts out there. Absolutely worth a follow at Shane P. Hallam, Hallam on Twitter, as you see on your screen. You can find his work on Draft Countdown. Listen to his podcast, The Devy Marketplace, which is great for Devy leagues. And really just any fantasy content in general is worth listening. Go follow him, especially after the draft. Shane, you're my favorite person after the draft because you keep me updated on all the undrafted free agents and you speak about them with actual knowledge. Like, I'm confident you actually watched film on these guys, whereas some of the other sites out there just kind of forget about those deep-seated players who will actually make an impact. Some of these guys make an impact, make a roster. We've seen it a couple years in a row now. Before we get into wide receivers and tight end prospects, that's what I want to do with our two-part draft series. Last week, we talked with Anthony Staggs about running backs and quarterbacks. Shane, before I get into that, I want to talk about your mock, and I want to talk about your process for profiling literally 1,000 prospects, because it seems daunting to me, and you do a 7-round mock, and I just want to talk to you about your process.
It's been a year, let me tell you. This year especially, it's the largest draft class in NFL draft history because of the COVID years and players could go back to school. Last year was the smallest. This is the largest. So it's the most that I've seen and wrote up. It's I got the 1,051 is my final number. I there's a couple kickers I kind of want to watch, but I think but I hit like double digits of kickers. I was like, I think I'm good. It's just about watching a little bit, making assessments quickly on a lot of these players. Are they NFL material? Are they not? And kind of moving on. Sometimes the biggest part is like finding the film on some of these small schools and trying to, okay, can I do enough from highlight film or what's on YouTube? And, I think for me, it's just about always evolving and changing. I go back to players again and again. We get workout numbers. We get new information. Someone's moving up this person's board that I trust. I didn't have them on my board. I had them really low. Like, let me go back and watch again. I think, I kind of approach it as nothing's ever finalized until we get there. I'm always tweaking and changing. And I think some people want to say, I had this take in January or November, and, I did too, but like, I was wrong a lot back then. Let's keep evolving. What matters is the finish line, not how you get there, to me. And that's always what I want to do, is just, I always say I'm not the smartest football guy. I didn't play the game, but I can outwork anyone. I can watch more of these players, and that's really where I come in, and that's my goal.
Just grinding. I love it. How do you keep yourself from getting distracted while you're watching? Because I know I find myself, like, I'll be watching Carson Strong tape, right? And then I'll be like, ooh, that tight end looks really good. And then I'll watch that tape. And then I'll be like, oh, man, that safety just made a play. And so I'll start watching another team safety. And before long, I forget who I was originally looking at. How do you keep yourself focused?
It's funny you say that, because when I watch, I literally have a Google Doc where I just, if a player does that to me, then I'm like, I'm going to write down that position number team, right? I just write it down. I'm like, I'm going to ignore him. Yeah. And now I have this big old list, and some of them are like crap players that just stood out one play that I'll never watch. But, I can go back, I can look at that, and, that's usually what I do.
My crap player is Deontay Burnett, the receiver from USC. I was watching Matt Barkley tape and going, Deontay Burnett. This is Deontay Burnett tape. That's what I'm watching right now. Ended up way too high on him. I'll stop. I could sit here and mutter about that for about 3 hours, but we don't have that time. So let's get into tight ends and wide receivers. I want to get tight ends out of the way first because it's just usually a shorter conversation than wide receivers, and this year it seems like it. What do you think of this class as a whole, Shane? Is there a Kyle Pitts like there was last year? Are there players that we're really looking at from a fantasy perspective?
There's definitely not a Kyle Pitts. This is not a tight end class with that, top tier player. Like a lot of positions in this draft, and like we'll talk about at receiver, you may not have that top player, but you have a lot of depth because this class is so big. There's a lot of players that are going to go day 2 that, tight end wise, that's a pretty nice sweet spot. If you're athletic and you at least go in the 2nd or 3rd round, you have a potential. The best tight ends in fantasy, Travis Kelce and George Kittle, these are guys that went in that direction, didn't go in the 1st round. So I think we have a lot of those players. The question just is, how much upside do they have? Trey McBride from Colorado State's the number 1 guy. I think when he ran a 4.56 at his pro day, kind of cemented that. That was the question. Is he athletic enough? He is. He caught a ton of passes, great body control. He doesn't separate, which is not great for us. That usually doesn't mean a ton of volume is going to come his way. He has a shot to go in the 1st. I think the Titans, the Bengals, but most likely early 2nd, the Giants are a team that comes to mind. And then I think there's a batch of about, 3 to 4 tight ends on day 2. Greg Dulcich from UCLA is going to be picked in day 2. He was in that Chip Kelly offense. So very like open space, Jason Witten, stick kind of routes, sticks in, gets the catch, does a little bit after the catch, but not too much. So, he could be a potential weapon, but he's a little on the smaller side, not much of a blocker. Jeremy Ruckert from Ohio State's kind of the other end, not very productive in college. Ohio State doesn't use their tight ends, but he can block, good red zone threat, flash some things. I think he'll go day 2. And then, day 2, early day 3 player that kind of everyone's been buzzing about is Jelani Woods from Virginia, transferred from Oklahoma State. He's older. I think that could have caused him to drop a little bit in the draft, but 6'7", 259, literally the best workout for a tight end ever in NFL draft history at the combine. That's a kind of upside if he goes round 3, like you got to take it. So, I think there is some tight ends and tight end premium leagues that could provide some value in rookie drafts, but you're not going to find that player that is, a gem, or especially their rookie year. I think we've been spoiled a little bit. I don't think we have that guy that's going to make a big impact.
Sure. Quickly, before I want to hear Jen's thoughts on redraft approaches to tight ends in general, because it's always sobering and necessary. But before that, I want to ask you quickly about Isaiah Likely from Coastal Carolina. I keep hearing about him. I kind of like his tape a little bit. Is he a player that you like, or do you have another deep sleeper that you're kind of watching?
I think Isaiah's Likely, his film is very, very good. And I think if his workouts had matched that film, I would be much higher on him. That's the big problem, because he's not much of a blocker. Though I think he flashes it more than a lot of people have given him credit for. The Senior Bowl, he was there. He had a nice block in the game that sprung Sam Howell for a rushing touchdown. But, when you're 245 pounds and you run a 4.8, like the threshold's 4.75. I mean, you got to be faster than that, especially at that weight. That's the scary part. He is athletic. He's explosive. So I think he's intriguing. I'll say probably the deeper sleeper that I like is Daniel Bellinger from San Diego State.
Okay.
Blocking tight end. That's all they used him with. But he's this like great athlete that I thought at the Senior Bowl, I was like, whoa, this guy can catch. Like I was writing him off. And so I think if there's a player that maybe has that upside day 3, I like him.
Excellent. Thank you. Jen, just real quick, like I said, this is the tight end class, so it doesn't need to be a huge discussion. We'll go deeper on receiver. Jen, your sobering reminder for redraft approaches to rookie tight ends, and also curious how you're approaching best ball with the rookie tight ends this year.
Yeah, well, yeah, that my take on rookie tight ends. Do not draft them in redraft. I mean, it's funny. Even last year, people are like, oh, is there a Kyle Pitts? Kyle Pitts wasn't that great last year. I mean, he only had 3 weeks of double-digit production. He was tight end 11, which is decent considering how bad the tight end group is. But, he averaged 8.4, half PPR points a game, and that was only really because of those 3, but he had like a 22-point game, which kind of, helps. But yeah, at the end of the day, and we also have Pat Freiermuth, who was decent. He ended up tight end 16, which, so I think if you're going straight up redraft, normal league, no premium, stay away from all rookies, even McBride. I just, regardless of where he lands, I just don't see, it just, historically, they don't pan out for redraft, regardless of talent, as we saw with Pitts. And as far as best ball, sure. I mean, if you really want to, obviously it depends on landing spot. If these guys like McBride and a couple of other ones that Shane mentioned end up on a really good situation, like say in Cincinnati or somewhere where they really need a tight end, then sure, throw a dart in the 16th, 17th round. But I wouldn't go out of your way to take a rookie tight end.
Excellent. They always go up. That top guy always seems to go 2 rounds before I want to take them. Chris, I know you play a lot more Dynasty than I do. I'm curious how you're approaching the tight end class from a Dynasty perspective. Do you have any targets, any locations you're eyeing, anything of that sort?
I know one location that I'm not eyeing is this rumor that's been going around about the Bengals taking Trey McBride in the first round. I don't want to sound like melodramatic or anything like that, but I will be apoplectic if the Bengals wind up using the 31st overall pick on a tight end, knowing what they need on defense, knowing that they could also use another offensive lineman. If they wind up doing this, I will not be happy. I'll just leave it at that. But for Dynasty purposes, targeting tight ends is something of a crapshoot. And the easiest way that I found in terms of, I guess, trying to figure out like which ones that I want to draft is kind of letting the NFL decide for us. Draft capital in this sense is one of the easiest ways for us to figure out like how we can value them moving forward. Because think about like kind of how Shane was kind of marking it out earlier in that. Think about the types of players that we would typically be drafting in the first rounds, or the NFL is drafting in the first rounds, the athletic guys, I mean, the wide receivers, running backs, whatever. And think about what tight ends would have to do in order to be considered to be in that same route or in that same area of the draft. And so that's why guys like Kyle Pitts were valued the way that they were last year, or even going back even further, guys like, David Njoku, Evan Ingram. Those guys that typically had like the higher draft capital, they had to be those athletic freaks in order to get there. And the league valued them as such. And so if we don't see any of that type of talent here in this class, then I think the easiest way to look at it is let's just stay away. Let's not use our first round rookie picks on those guys. Let's wait until, let's say, possibly the second round. And I think history's kind of bore that out. Like what Jen was mentioning earlier, of course, Kyle Pitts, he was drafted in the first round, wound up with at least a top 12 rank at the tight end position. And that's somewhat bore out in the numbers. I think over the past, like since the 2017 season, I think there have been 6 or 7 tight ends that have been drafted in the first round. 2 have finished as a top 12 tight end their rookie season. Do you guys want to know? Take a wild guess. For day 2 picks, so round 2, round 3, how many have finished in the top 12 their rookie season?
Day 2, day 3?
Day 2, just like round 2 or round 3. Rookie season finished in the top 12.
Oh, I knew this like a year ago. I had
we had a whole talk about it.
Yeah, I don't think so.
0.
Yeah, because I know like Jeremy Shockey.
It was Shockey. Yeah, Shockey was the only guy.
Yeah. Since 2017, not a single one. Top 24, absolutely. But we really don't care about those guys anyway. Right? It was like Pat Freiermuth last year, Dallas Goedert, like his first year. But really,
Gronk.
we haven't been seeing. Yeah, Gronk. If you want to go back even further, but like. We're looking at this point, if let's see, like Dulcich, I think if I went over to like grinding the mocks, like right now, I think he's like somewhere in like maybe like the 70s or 80s, 70th or 80th overall, somewhere in that range.
Woo.
McBride, 60s, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
So if we're not even like, we can't even squint to see any of these guys being drafted even close to the first round. And if at best we're talking is a day 2 pick for any of these guys, yeah, at best you're probably looking at, let's say in 1 QB leagues for Dynasty, if folks happen to play in those types of formats, you're probably looking at mid to late second, somewhere in that range for draft value. And then that's for guys like Trey McBride or like Dulcich. Guys that even if they get on the field, we can see them projecting them to get targets their rookie season. But past that, any of the other guys that we're even considering drafting at this point, they are the latest of picks that you could possibly get, with the hope for they can develop into something, their second, third year, so on and so forth.
Okay, so fade this in redraft, fade this in best ball, fade this in dynasty for this tight end class. I love it. I love it. And folks, if you want to go overdraft a rookie tight end in best ball, check out Underdog. We have a promo right now where if you deposit $10 into a new Underdog account, get a deposit bonus match and a 4for4 Pro subscription. Just enter 4for4, 4FOR4 in the promo code box and get you some fun money to play with and play some Underdog. You'll probably see all of us in those Underdog lobbies ready to draft. So let's talk receivers. Shane, how does this receiver class stack up to the last two? Because we're coming off two really good receiver classes, and where we had elite fantasy production from a rookie in each of the last two seasons with Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, solid talent across the board. How does this class stack up?
I think it stacks up well. I think that you don't have that Jamar Chase, obviously. You don't have that kind of high-end receiver. But after that, I mean, I think it stacks up really, really well. I think with 2020, I think it's going to be a very similar class to that, where you're going to have maybe some guys that emerge from that first round. I think you're going to have some players from the second day emerge and have an impact. The key is going to be finding which ones, because once again, it's pretty deep. I think we could see upwards of, I'd say probably 13 to 14 go in the first 2 days.
Wow.
Teams are very wide receiver needy. We have plenty of teams that need one. Some need two. I think there's a lot of teams that we anticipate as fantasy people don't need one, that probably may draft one day too. I think that's really what happens. So you kind of have, to me, I kind of have a big five that seems to have turned into a big four at the top of this draft. So it seems more and more like, I think four are guaranteed to go in the first round, and that's it. Garrett Wilson from Ohio State's my number one. Drake London from Southern Cal, my number 3, Jameson Williams from Alabama, my number 4, and Chris Olave from Ohio State, my number 5. I think those four are going to go in the first round. Fair. Nothing's ever a lock in the NFL draft, but pretty as close as you can get. I think Treylon Burks from Arkansas, who was a fantasy darling very early on and maybe still is in some circles. He just has not lived up to the athletic expectations that were kind of put on him. He's technically by the RAS score, the worst athlete of the 5. Drake London did not work out. He may have been there. But a 4.55, 6'2", 225 as a big slot. Burks may not go in the first round. I think he still will. And he's my number 2 receiver. I think he's still really, really good. I think he could end up being a value. So I think that's what you're looking at. Now, I think a lot of people have said, more receivers are going in the first round. We want more, right? I think Jahan Dotson from Penn State could. I think a team like the Chiefs is a good fit for him late in the first round.
He's a speed guy, right?
He's a speed guy, but I think when you watch him, he does a lot more than that. Like, his body control is really good. He goes up for passes. I think because he's 178 pounds, people are like, oh, this is someone just runs past you. He plays bigger than that. I think he's tough. I think he could be, honestly, I think he could be one of the better values, because I think in the fantasy community, people are going to see that size and say, nope, he's a 5, he's a senior, not an early declare. He's small. I'm out. Right. But that can end up being, he could be like Kadarius Toney was, a guy that goes in the second round of rookie drafts, and boom, you have a player that looks like he has a lot of potential because he has that athleticism. And I think the talk of the next tier potentially going in the first is a little bit overblown. Personally, I really like Christian Watson from North Dakota State. He's my number 6 receiver. I had an article with Draft Countdown in early January where I thought his career trajectory, I think it's going to be like Cooper Kupp. I think it's going to be, takes a little, I know it takes a little bit to get going. Like, you got to go a little spicy to get people to read it. Right.
I love it. Yeah. I love it. That's hot.
But, I think he's that kind of player. North Dakota State, a rushing offense. They didn't throw that much, even when Trey Lance was there, right? I mean, he was running all over the place. So Watson never had a 1,000-yard season, but 6'4", 208, 4.3 speed. I was like, oh, he can't run routes, right? That's going to be the problem. And then at the Senior Bowl, I didn't see a rep where he wasn't open, running the route tree. I was like, oh my goodness, this guy is a late bloomer that could be really good. So I think, it'll take him a year, and then I think he'll just take off and be the number 1 receiver for a team. I still think the NFL is going to be taking an FCS receiver that without production is very scary to do in the first round. I think he goes in the second. That George Pickens from Georgia has the off-field concerns. Skyy Moore from Western Michigan, probably the next tier in that second round. I think I could, like I said, I could talk for an hour just going down the list because I think there are legitimately, 14, 15 guys that could make an early impact in the NFL.
So you said 4 definitely in the first round. Gun to your head, how many do you expect to go if you were guessing in the first round?
I'm going to go 6. I think 6 end up going. I think Burks, maybe Jerry Jones with the Arkansas ties can't help himself, and takes Traylon Burks. And, I think, like I said, I think John Dotson sneaks in there. I think those 6 probably.
So you mentioned, Dotson possibly to the Chiefs. What are some of the other landing spots that you're thinking for some of these top guys, like your maybe first tier, second tier, just, ones that stand out where you would like to see them, where you think they'll go?
It's tough. I think we know the Jets want a receiver. I don't think a Deebo Samuel trade's coming. So if that's the case, I think 10 is a nice spot. If they take their pass rusher at 4, then I think 10 could be the start of the receiver run. There's differing opinions of who they would want there. Like I said, Garrett Wilson's my number 1 receiver. I don't think they'll pick him. Right now, I have them taking Jameson Williams, the receiver from Alabama, had the ACL tear, but probably people would have said he'd be number 10 if that wasn't the case. Drake London has the size that's different from Corey Davis and Elijah Moore, right? So that can make sense. But I think the Jets, Washington, the Commanders at 11 look to be, if they don't go in the secondary, I think they're going to take a receiver. Ron Rivera went to the Ohio State Pro Day, only his 4th Pro Day in his entire coaching career that he attended. Wow. One of them was Cam Newton. So, there's I think they're going to take an Ohio State player. There's 2 receivers here. If Garrett Wilson's there, I think they take him. If not, I think they take Chris Olave if they don't go in the secondary. Past that, I think it's tough. Like, I think the Eagles could take a 3rd one in 33 straight years, take another receiver. They certainly need that, and there's been some rumors there. I actually think maybe one of them – I actually don't think the Packers will take one. That's kind of the big thing, I guess. I don't think they're taking a receiver in the first round.
Yeah.
They have the 2 picks. I think they're going to look in the second. They've had a ton of success. Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, Devontae Adams in the second round. I think it's going to be like an offensive lineman, defensive lineman, and everyone's going to be like, what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering too, just kind of building off that point about the Packers, like they're the ones that have that size, speed thresholds, like don't they, for a lot of the receivers that they draft? So I mean, which of those guys do you think kind of fit that mold that might be available to them at that point? I'm struggling to think of past some of the guys that we know are going to go earlier in the first round. Is there anybody that you think could even fit what they would typically like to draft? I mean, I've heard folks talk about Chris Olave possibly going there, even though in my opinion, I think it'd be better for Olave to go to a organization that has an established wide receiver 1 already to work alongside like a
Philly.
Established. Yeah. Philly, I think would work. Washington, I think would also work for a guy like Olave. But I mean, can you think of anybody else that might fit what the Packers are really looking for and that might be available to them?
I think that's what makes it difficult because they do like those high RAS scores, high athletic players. So that's why I think a lot of people are saying, okay, Christian Watson and George Pickens both fit what they would take. Yeah. So are they going to reach on one of those players? From what I'm hearing, I think those guys are closer to the 3rd round than closer to the 1st round. So I think they could get one in round 2. I think that's more likely to happen. They get one of those players. And I think they like Skyy Moore as a slot player. He doesn't quite have the size that we typically see, but would be, basically what they drafted Amari Rodgers to be, except, 20 times more athletic to play that slot role. So I would say, those 3, but I don't think any of them are going in the first round. And so that's kind of where I'm landing there.
That makes sense. So I wanted to talk really quickly about, I guess, sleepers and busts. I know sleepers is a term that at this point, with social media being such a big thing, that there are no sleepers at this point. But I did want to at least ask you about a couple of guys that I'm having some trouble evaluating. And one of them is Justin Ross. And I remember hearing buzz about Ross like almost like 2 to 3 years ago, like when he first came out, because didn't he have 1,000-yard season, his first year at Clemson, but he got hurt in 2020 with the pandemic and whatnot as well. He didn't really have a ton of production over his final 2 seasons. So I'm hearing a lot of buzz about him at this point, but with the lack of production, not entirely his fault. I mean, how have you gone about evaluating him, and where would you kind of place him from a value perspective? Are you expecting him to go at some point in day 2, or can you see him sliding kind of a bit farther just because of the medical concerns and teams not really having a ton to go off of in terms of wondering where he's at from a development standpoint?
I'll be pretty surprised if he goes day 2, to be honest with you. I mean, you couldn't have found a bigger Justin Ross stan than me. I drafted him when he was a senior in high school. Like I have him in Debbie leagues. Yeah. Like I really liked him. And then he had that 1,000-yard season 2018. He had a very good season 2019, and then had a spinal condition essentially that the worry was, can he play football again? And then, like you said, 2020 didn't play. And then 2021, it was injury after injury, broken foot, stinger, like he was in and out. And so, you have not only you have the big medical red flag, but I'll tell you, watching him in 2021, he was not the same player. I mean, this guy was not as fast, not as athletic. And so, that's the big question. Is that a 1-year thing, or is it going to be more than that? I think I'll be surprised if he goes day 2. I think he's probably looking more –
fifth rounder,
5th round, 5th to 6th round, and it could be one of those guys that we're waiting for round 7, and he just doesn't get drafted. Right, if the medical red flags are there, and that which sucks.
Right, because if you look at that body type, I mean, guys that, especially when he was in his quote unquote prime throughout college, 6'4", 205. I mean, I've seen AJ Green comparisons just from the body type, just because we don't really see guys that are that tall being able to move the way that he was able to, his first year at Clemson. So it's I'm hoping to see him go to a team that at least can believe that he can get back to that form. I've seen, I think there was a mock, I forget where had him going to the Jaguars, I think somewhere in the 5th or 6th round, which kind of makes sense at this point, looking at their needs right now. They could use a big body receiver with Chark gone to Detroit, Marvin Jones, who also plays on the outside. I mean, he's, getting long in the tooth as well. So I get the need for that. But again, it's just who's going to be that team that kind of wants to punch that ticket and say that, we're going to take a chance on a guy like him. And at this point, I just don't know.
Yeah, I think there'll be a team, right? Someone has to take that shot, like you said, to, you have a good medical staff, you feel good, and you watch that freshman film. I mean, he was the best freshman receiver in college football. He should have been the best receiver in this class. So I hope he gets back there. I hope he ends up an absolute steal when all's said and done.
Yeah, another guy that I wanted to ask you about, and this is again where I have trouble kind of trying to sift through the traits of the player, and this is Calvin Austin. I mean, so we're going from a big tall receiver in Justin Ross to a smaller guy, more I hate to use the term gadgety, but I'm just trying to find a way to fit and see where Calvin Austin is going to fit in the league. I've seen comps thrown out of Isaiah McKenzie, somewhere in that range. That's because he's 5'7", 5'8", and $170, $180, somewhere in that range. So how are you going about trying to fit a guy that, productive in college, but can you see some of the traits that he had there in college also translating to the NFL? Or does he really need the right scheme in order for him to be at least a significant producer for fantasy purposes?
I think he's definitely going to need the right scheme. He's going to be one of those players that fantasy wise, I'm much lower on than real life wise. One of those guys that you're okay, you're going to need to find ways to get the ball in his hands creatively, because he was highly productive at that size. He has the speed. He's a 4.3 speed player, but even more so than Tutu Atwell, the forbidden name in fantasy circles from last year.
Yeah.
Tutu Atwell at least could take a little bit of push. He could get a little physical. Calvin Austin doesn't do that. He was kind of schemed open to avoid contact. And when he does face contact, when he played against better teams, he struggled. He struggled to get open, and they didn't throw the ball to him as much. He's a top end returner, maybe the best return guy in this class, punt returner, with that kind of potential. So yeah, if he goes day 2, then I think my interest renews itself. I'm kind of thinking he goes round 4, because I think there's a lot more negative traits than, say, a Tutu Atwell was, as much as we in the fantasy community don't want to believe that per se.
No, and I think that makes sense, because if you look at Calvin Austin's efficiency metrics, I think he was top 20 in terms of yards per route run, like that in his final season in college. And so I do think that if he does fall into the right scheme, he can be that guy. My fear is that he winds up being like the next like Andy Isabella, where it's just like a team just kind of, pigeonholes him into a spot. He doesn't work out, and it just kind of like phases out of that offense, and we just never hear from him again. But
he's
like
got better hands though, right?
Definitely has. I think
Isabella, coming out, we were like, yeah, he can run downfield.
But the landing spot for Isabella was just like, oh well, if Cliff Kingsbury's going to take him, he's going to be paired with Kyler Murray. Then all right, it's game on. Like, we have to value him at this point. So that's my only concern. But like you mentioned, Shane, I mean, the punt return specialist portion to his game, I think, also gives him another out, as like possibly for remaining on a team and then being able to at least kind of work his way up. Because I think that's almost the same way that Isaiah McKenzie kind of made his bones before he became a larger part of the Bills offense. So I can see that being a path for him for sure.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think it's possible. He reminds me kind of Ray McLeod a bit, who had success last year a little bit, when Juju Smith-Schuster was hurt with the Steelers. I think Calvin Austin could be that kind of player. Like you said, you get him on the field, I think you get the ball in his hands, he's got to do some decent things with it.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
I'm perking up as the person who writes the return specialist article in July.
All right, one last guy I wanted to ask you about, and this is where I think where taking the metrics that we take from the combine, or that we hear from the combine, and not overreacting to them. But how should we be valuing David Bell? Because I know a lot of folks, after they saw the 4.65 40, everybody's like, oh, he's too slow. We don't want to mess with him anymore. We need speed, guys. We need 4.3, 4.4, or 4.44. What's going on? We need the guys that can run that fast. But if we don't have that with David Bell, what can he give us, or what is his trump card in order to overcome that? I mean, does he have something that we should be looking at instead of the, I guess, quote unquote, red flag that is his 40 time?
I think he does have some of that, right? I mean, he's highly productive. I think if he goes day 2, then, which I think he will, I think he'll go round 3, then I think you feel better. Like, if a team's willing to invest the top 100 pick in you, despite the negative, workouts and how bad that was. I mean, that means you have some special football talents. I think sometimes we view that as a bad thing, but like, if it causes them to fall to the 6th, yeah, I'm out. But if he's still a 3rd round pick, like, that's what happened to Keenan Allen, right? He fell because he wasn't very fast. Now, do I think David Bell's the route runner that Keenan Allen was? I don't think Bell gets that separation in college that Keenan Bell did. And that's kind of the forbidden, like, you don't get separation. It's going to be tough to win in the NFL. Right. But I'll say what David Bell does well is he can high point a football, and he's so good at tracking the football. Like, he has one of the best, and this is kind of a weird scouting thing, but he is one of the best receivers in this class at kind of turning late and catching the football. Like, he doesn't need to see the football very long, and it's kind of a strange thing, but he doesn't need to see it very long. And so often, if the corner is looking at him, the corner doesn't react in time because he doesn't, he still makes the catch. I think so I think there are skills in his game. I think he has a high football IQ. I think he understands what defenses run, and he understands how to win against the guys he's playing against. That's important to me. So if his 4.65 and bad explosion and agility drills, if that causes him to fall in rookie drafts, I think I'm going to be one of those guys that's in. If he goes to a good spot and goes to a spot that I think he can, play early, and they draft him in the top 100.
He kind of fits the thresholds for the Packers, like for a later round pick, doesn't he? I mean, just with the size alone.
Yeah, with the size, and we saw them take a negative RAS player in Amari Rodgers last year. So I don't think they're opposed to having a highly productive player that fits a role. That'd be a slam dunk spot, and I think it would push his value up maybe more than I would want it to. But I think that would be really good for him.
Yeah.
Speaking of the Packers, we might as well just stay on the same line here. What are your thoughts on Alec Pierce from Cincinnati? I know that he's been comped to Jordy, whether or not it's, whatever. But I just am curious what if you feel, what is your take on him in general? And if you feel like he could be a Packer fit as well.
I think he really could. I'm intrigued to see where he goes. I think he's going to go in the top 100 pretty squarely. Just that size and speed is intriguing. But I think you also toss in, like, he was the primary target at Cincinnati, at a very productive offense. And it wasn't just, run down the field in a straight line, Alec, and like go get it, right? I mean, Desmond Ridder, who is in this class, does not have the best deep ball arm in the draft. And so a lot of it was, short intermediate routes, slants off the line and letting Alec Pierce get the ball in his hands. And after the catch, I think he's very good. He's not quite on the end of Isabella scale, but he has some of those stone hands and it can make the easy drops there with Alec Pierce. So I think there's some technique issues where, he wastes a lot of movement. He doesn't, because he has that athleticism, often doesn't need to do that. And so we saw him disappear in some bigger games. But I mean, yeah, I think he would fit. If the Packers took him, even in round 2, I wouldn't be overly surprised at that. I think there are going to be teams that have him in the top 10 receivers on their board pretty squarely.
This is a little off from there, but we were talking landing spots. We focused a lot on Green Bay. There's another team that people are just dying to find out which wide receiver they bring in. The Chiefs have brought in Juju Smith-Schuster, Marcus Valdes-Scantling. We have McCole Hardman, the holdover there. Obviously, though, it looks like there's a spot for one of these guys to step in and make an immediate contribution in a big-time offense. Do you have a favorite fit or a hope or a spot that you're watching for Kansas City at the wide receiver position in the draft?
I think they're in a kind of a tough place because either you take one, late round 1, where honestly, I think the top 4 or 5 are going to be gone. So then I think it is Jahan Dotson from Penn State that we talked about before, or you're looking at pick 50, the middle of the second round. And, I struggle because I think the Chiefs can go 2 ways, right? We can see them, are they going to go against kind of their recent typing and maybe take someone a little bigger, a little more alpha receiver-esque, like we've been talking about for the Packers, or do they kind of stick to, we'll take the smaller speed, quick, get open quickly guy that maybe fits that offense a little bit better. And so that's why I like, Skyy Moore, someone like that. I'll say kind of a sneaky pick for them might be John Mechie III out of Alabama.
Yep.
He's a player towards ACL in the playoff. So might be one of those players that goes on the PUP list and maybe has a sluggish, rookie year. I think he's just such a smooth kind of athlete who can get in and out of his breaks pretty quickly, showed some promise this season, even though he wasn't the number 1 guy. I don't think the Chiefs necessarily want a number 1, right? They're fine with a bunch of number 2 receivers that can do what they can in the offense. I think that's what John Mechie is. So if there's a player that could go at 50, I think he would be an intriguing fit that we haven't talked about yet.
So there's 300 more players I want to ask you about, Shane, before we go. I do want to mention just 300. There's I want to ask you 2 more specific players. We talked about Garrett Wilson being your number 1. We talked about him not being Jamar Chase. I'm just wondering, why is he your number 1? What do you like about him? Where's your favorite spot for him?
So I love how it's kind of 2 things with him. I love how he gets off the line. I mean, he has this explosive first step. It's almost Deontay Johnson-esque where he can just get open really, really quickly without much contact. And you can throw those quick passes to him, which Ohio State didn't do that much, but I think they really could have. There are a number of plays when I was watching him when he just right off the line's wide open. I'm like, just throw him the ball. Not Ohio State didn't need to, like you didn't have to. They did just fine not doing that, but like just throw him the ball. He's wide open. So I love that. And then when he is down the field or when he is more contested, I mean, his body control is exceptional. He's made some fantastic sideline catches. He knows where his feet are. He knows where he needs to be to adjust his body to make the catch. So you usually don't have a player that's 183 pounds that can make contested catches like he can. And that's what kind of puts him in that for me is I think he can do some of those things that a top tier receiver can do despite not having the size that teams might want. In a perfect world, like I would love maybe to get him on the Saints I think that would be great. I don't think it's going to happen, but I would love that fit where they've had, kind of slant king Michael Thomas for how long and have been able to use a player like that, but also need that kind of fast, deeper threat. I think Wilson could provide that. I think a team like Washington, the Commanders, makes a lot of sense. Put him with Terry McLaurin, who has a little bit more of that deeper speed, and Wilson can get off the line, do some of the short work. And I think Carson Wentz, he'd be a really good fit there. So that's kind of where I'm hoping. That seems more realistic.
And then I've got two favorite receivers in this draft. They're not my number one, number two receivers. They're just my favorite guys to watch, and they're day two guys who I'm just eager to see. And you mentioned Skyy Moore is one of them. I always like the plucky, undersized guy with the chip on his shoulder. I've always liked that. The other one is Wan'Dale Robinson, the Kentucky kid. Nice lineage in Kentucky. Not a lot of players come out of there, but Stevie Johnson I loved Randall Cobb. Those guys coming up. Wan'Dale Robinson seems like that versatile type of player. What do you think of Robinson? And am I right to be hopeful that I see him on day two?
I mean, better than staying in Nebraska, better than that pipeline. So I'm glad he transferred. Look, I love Wan'Dale Robinson. My prospect comp for him was T.Y. Hilton. I think he reminds me a lot of T.Y. Hilton coming out of college, right? Small, but plays a lot bigger, gets physical, gets down the field, is running wide receiver one, starting wide receiver routes at 5'8", 178 pounds. So that's why I like him, because I think you can still use him in a more traditional role in the right offense. I also think, he can do a lot of things. He came into college as a running back. He played running back at Nebraska. So there's a lot of versatility when we talk about who's the next Deebo Samuel, who's the next Cordero Patterson, right? I think Wan'Dale Robinson, he's played those positions. He knows how to do that. I think there's a lot of versatile ways you can use him. Day two, I think, is a stretch. I'm hoping. I hope he goes round 3. I think there's a chance. I don't think it's 0%. I think it's more than 10%. But I think just due to the depth of this receiver class, he's one of those guys that's going to get pushed down into round 4 or 5. And maybe that provides a value. We kind of put this arbitrary line because round 3 goes to round 4. And, there's different days now. But, if he goes early round 4, is it that much different? I think with the depth of this class as a whole, the defensive side is stellar. Some of these receivers that go round 4, round 5 might provide fantasy value if people discount them due to draft capital. I think Wan'Dale Robinson is going to be one of those guys.
Nice. So I'm basically just taking you to say that I'm right to love him. He's perfect in every way, and all teams are dumb to not take him on day 2. That's what I.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm getting out of this. Yeah, exactly. Well, no, because I was going to ask about him too, because he's almost, I think he's maybe 8 to 10 pounds heavier than Calvin Austin. So our team's going to essentially fall into the same trap. Because we were having the same conversation about Austin earlier. Are you going to see the small, shifty guy and try and pigeonhole him into this specific role? And then we just wind up not really getting or seeing him used in the optimal way. And that's my only concern for guys that kind of fall into that archetype of receiver. But hopefully, we get him in the right spot and he falls to the right team that can at least utilize him in the way that we expect him to.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, right? That's the fear. You get someone that just can't utilize those talents. I think Wan'Dale Robinson's more well-rounded than Calvin Austin is in terms of what he can provide as a receiver, provide down the field, provide on the outside. But, you could get a team that says, no, we want you to just have 3 touches a game. That's what we're drafting for. Mm-hmm. And then, we'll just never see it. So.
Here, go take your jet sweep. Come on back to the bench.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yep.
Good job, Wan'Dale. Thanks, man. Yeah.
I wanted to quickly ask you before we go, just to round this out. So the draft ends on Saturday, 2023 prep for you. Does it start Sunday?
Yeah. I'll
really.
I'll have a 3-round mock. 2023 3-round mock up on Sunday.
That's amazing.
By the end of May, I'll have a 7-round mock. So it's coming. Don't worry. I got 4 quarterbacks going in the first round. So get ready.
So I want Washington to do what you said, take Wilson, right? And then next year they could just take the Ohio State quarterback. So they'll be good to go.
2 wins this year. It's all you need. And
All right. Chris, Jen, anyone we missed?
I've covered all my guys. I think I've got everybody that I wanted to discuss. So, thanks again, Shane, for your time.
I mean, on my end, there's not enough George Pickens talk, but that's okay. I can live with it.
Shane, anyone you wanted to bring up that we didn't get to today? I know your list is very expansive.
Look, I only watched 158 receivers, so 159. I added one last week. 159. So if you want me to talk about these guys from Japan, I can talk about them. There's 2 in this draft.
My gosh.
I have a guy from McPherson College. So if you want to really get down and dirty, we can do it. We can do another few hours.
Let's say, can we get 5 minutes on Eric Izukanma? I mean, get some thoughts on him real quick.
I think he's underrated. I think he's going to be criminally underdrafted. I mean, 6'2", 209, really good footwork. I mean, as a Conma, Texas Tech is just not a school where you're going to get some of the crisp, runs a full route tree. But Ezukanma has flashed that ability to me. I think if you can coach him up to expand on what he has, I think he has some starting potential. I think him and probably Kyle Phillips from UCLA are probably the 2 day 3 receivers that we could say in 5 years, these guys are starters in the NFL. They're 2 of my sleepers there.
Yeah, throw Izukanma in a big slot position for first couple of seasons, and then see if he can develop from there, and then put him the outside afterwards. I think that could work for him.
Yeah. I love it. I love that we got Ezukanma discussion on this podcast. This is fantastic. Shane, thank you so much for joining us. Listeners should definitely read Shane's Mock It Draft Countdown. Check out the Devy Marketplace podcast. Follow Shane on Twitter. Do yourself a favor at Shane P. Hallam. Any final thoughts or plugs before we go, Shane?
No, I will be live streaming during the draft all 3 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So if you want instant analysis, every pick, every position, every player, myself and my managing partner, Brian Basarge, over at youtube.com/The Draft Countdown. You can check us out and subscribe there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Chris and Jen. Always a pleasure. Listeners, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at The Monday Mommy, at Chris Allen FFWX, and at 2 Guys Brandon. Thanks so much for checking us out and have a good day.